Hey, what's happening, y'all? It's me coming back at you again with another vid. Well, Joe Smith Jr. has called out Sergey Kovalev. So he had a recent interview with Boxing Scene, and he says, "Look, I want that fight right after he takes care of Sullivan Barrera. Now, we all know that's not a easy cakewalk there when it comes to Sullivan Barrera, because Sullivan Barrera is a much bigger guy naturally than Smith, and he punches much harder than Smith. As Barrera seems to have has more, I say more of, he has better boxing skills than Smith. But however, to be fair to Joe, and I like Joe's mentality, I like the way he approaches fights so far. Joe has been an underdog in his last two fights. Heavy underdog against Andrew Vanvara, knocked him out surprisingly in the first round, and then knocked out Bernard Hopkins. The only guy to knock out Bernard Hopkins. The only guy to give Bernard Hopkins his only knockout defeat. Even though Bernard Hopkins has lost prior to the Joe Smith fight, whatnot. So, Joe did something that Sergey Kovalev couldn't do. And Sergey Kovalev is a much more dangerous fighter than Joe Smith Jr. and much more powerful fighter than him. But given that Sergey Kovalev is now damaged goods, Andre Ward has pretty much put out exploited the blueprint of how to beat Kovalev. So Joe Smith is going to want that fight. If he does get that fight, he definitely is going to target the body to get Kovalev out of there real quickly. So, now, speaking of Kovalev, he is scheduled to come back in November. HBO will broadcast that fight, but we don't know who that opponent may be. But as I've argued, though, even though I've been, going after Kovalev, but if a guy who has some rational sense like myself, I really believe that Kovalev should take it easy on himself and take a tune-up, because the 4 of his last 5 fights have been really, really tough, and he's suffered he's taken a lot of damage in those fights. Again, naming the first John Pascal fight, then the Isaac Chilemba fight, and then, of course, the last 2 Ward fights, when he's taken a lot more damages than the Chilemba and the Pascal fight. So, but also, Joe also had something to say about this as well. It's not about this. He also said that he wouldn't mind taking on Andre Ward and Adonis Stevenson. So he definitely want to take on those guys as well. Now, as we all know, that he did have an opportunity to take on Stevenson, and of course, those negotiations fell through because his camp was trying to play the quote-unquote A side on the negotiation process. So they were trying to dictate terms according to Stevenson's team. So that's why they weren't having it, and that's why the negotiations, the Stevenson's team backed out of the negotiations process. Now, let's be honest here. I really don't like this A side, B side terminology when it comes to boxing. But since Stevenson is the champion, and I will be fair this time to Adonis Stevenson, even though I've been really, really criticizing him over the past couple weeks or so, he does have a right to say, you know what, you don't get to dictate terms for anything, because I'm the A side here. I am the champion. I am the lineal champion of the division that we fight in, and I've beaten more world champions than you. So what gives you a right to think that you get to dictate terms? You just got, you got 2 wins over Andrew Vanvara, who's not, considered he's a good fighter, Andrew Vanvara, but he hasn't won a title. He hasn't been a world champion. You beat him, great. You beat over the hill Bernard Hopkins. So why should I give you why should you state the claim to the A side when it comes to the negotiation process? So I'm sure that's what Stevenson's camp was saying, so that's why they backed out of it. So hopefully they do come to terms somehow, some way, because I wouldn't mind seeing the Joe Smith Jr. versus Adonis Stevenson fight. That would be a tough challenge for Stevenson. So obviously I'm going to pick Stevenson to win that fight. But it definitely I think Joe Smith would be formidable for Stevenson, and definitely for Kovalev. So if I had to pick a winner, if that fight does come to fruition, now let's not get it twisted here. We can't overlook the Sullivan Barrera. So Joe Smith really got to focus on that fight. If it does happen, Kovalev and Smith Jr., I don't know, man. I would still slightly favor Kovalev to win that fight because Kovalev does have the experience, and he has, he has been in tough fights against formidable opponents in his weight class as opposed to Joe Smith Jr. So, then again, Kovalev could look like he's past his prime now, given the fact that he was in 2 tough fights with Andre Ward, and it could appear that Andre Ward has really damaged him not only physically but also psychologically as well. So, but yeah, that's yet to be seen. We'll see how Kovalev approaches when he comes back in November in his next fight. If it's a tune-up, I wouldn't expect too much of a change out of that tune-up. But if he gets in there and gets another top light heavyweight like Joe Smith Jr., then we can make an assessment on where his career is at that point. So when it gets to it, so yeah. Now, as far as Andre Ward and Adonis Stevenson, like I said, I favor Adonis Stevenson heavily to beat Joe Smith Jr., and I certainly favored Andre Ward to beat Joe Smith Jr. heavily as well. So, but again, I got to give Joe props, man. He does want those fights. He welcomes it, and he also has a 9-to-5 job. He works as a hard laborer. He's a union laborer in construction. So, definitely, a guy who likes his job a lot, and also, at the same time, he's a part-time boxer. So you gotta like his approach. He's like Julius Ndongo. Ndongo's the same way. He's a part-time boxer and he's a full-time cop in his home country in Namibia. So, definitely interesting situation between the 2 fighters. So, or of the 2 fighters, I should say. Yeah, let me know what your thoughts about Joe Smith's call out of Sergey Kovalev, and how do you favor his chances against Kovalev? And in fact, since his fight with Barrera is coming up, which is in what day is that fight? I know it's coming up pretty soon. I think in a couple weeks or so. I have to go back and look at the schedule, but he definitely got to focus on that Barrera fight because, like I said, that's no cakewalk right there, and Barrera is very dangerous, and yeah, Smith got to be very, very cautious in that fight. So, yeah, let me know what your thoughts about. Again, what do you think his chances are against Sergey Kovalev, Joe Smith? And what do you think his chances are against either Adonis Stevenson or Andre Ward? Yeah, let me know what your thoughts about this. I'm out.